Good afternoon and evening, everyone. Welcome to episode 8 of Living on Borrowed Crime, True Talk, or real talk, with real true crime content creators. I'll get this right eventually. And joining me today are Drewby and Jurgi, the two pillars of the Misery Machine. Guys, thanks so much for joining me today.
Thank you.
Happy to be here.
A couple things before we begin. First and foremost, in the description of the video, you'll find all things Misery Machine, including their YouTube channel, Twitter, Patreon, Discord, Facebook, and so on. Please take a look at that when you have the opportunity. If you're not already aware of their work, I hope you'll take a look at it after listening to them today. Also, if you'll pay attention to the top of the chat box and the description as well, I have a link up there for the donation page for Trinity Jubilee Center of Lewiston, Maine. The charitable organization supported by the Misery Machine. And if you can donate, that would be very much appreciated. If you can't, that's fine. But if you can share that out on social media, that would be very much appreciated. With that, yes, this was supposed to take place last Friday, but someone had the gall to postpone it.
Yes, to cancel like 2 or 3 hours ahead of time.
Yeah, I mean, better late than never, as they say. But first and foremost, Drewby, yes, had to go in for emergency gallbladder removal surgery. Was that it?
Yes, that is correct. I would ask Jurgi. I was sitting in the ER, and I was just like, "We're gonna have to cancel the interview. I hate this so much. I hate this so much."
Yeah, it was about 4 o'clock. They're about to like roll you into the operating room. I'm like, scribe, I'm so sorry.
And like I mean, yeah, no, priorities are priorities, and definitely no big deal at all. And I'm glad to see you up and around and doing so well. Before I get started here, thank you so much, Derek LaRue, as always, for your continued support and generosity. Really appreciate it. Hope you're having a good Friday and hope you enjoy the show. And for everybody else in the chat, I hope you'll forgive me for not going through a usual round of hellos so we can get into the conversation. If you do have questions for Drewby or Jurgi as we go, there will be question time near the end. We're going to go for about an hour and a half, I think, there's about. So if you have questions, hold on to them till then. Of course, super chats, you guys will get first priority. But with that, so how did I want to start this interview? I thought about this over and over again. I had an extra week to think about it. And the one question that kept coming to mind, and I hope you'll forgive me my sardonic humor, why do you hate yourselves?
Because of what we cover?
Yeah, well, I mean, I'll sorry, that was bad. One second. Thank you, Keeverdam. Stream has been shared. Thank you, Keeverdam. No, I'll hold off on asking something about that till later. I just wanted to get that off my chest. So let's talk origins here. How long has the Misery Machine been on the air?
So we started July of 2019. Is that right, Jurgi?
It is.
Sounds about right. Yep. This is something that Jurgi had guested on a show a few times prior. This is something like I always wanted to do. We had a lot of shared experiences around here because we both met at a call center where 2 murders happened. And originally, the Misery Machine was supposed to be our way of documenting what happened. And feel free to ask clarifying questions because, like, I'm going to be a little all over the place explaining this.
Sure.
But where we're from in Lewiston, Maine, but Maine as a whole, when murders take place, it's something that they want to open and shut very quickly because the way that people think about Maine is that nothing bad happens here. This is a safe place to raise a family. It's a safe place to go on vacation. There's nothing sketchy here. Nothing bad ever happens. And when 2 of the murders happened, like the second one, the murder of Christiana Fesmeyer, which we covered as a 3-part episode on our channel, there was a lot of information missing, and I felt like the justice system, to put it lightly, didn't do their due diligence or uphold justice correctly. And there wasn't a whole lot of information available to the public. And I felt that we could use our channel to tell all the facts as best we know them in order to best honor Christiana's life, and as well as other people that may or may not have gotten screwed over by the justice system in the case. So that was kind of like what started all of this.
All right. Now, before YouTube, did either of you have any prior experience, let's say educationally or professionally, with either criminal justice, social work, journalism, or video production?
Just an interest in true crime, really.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, because I always wonder. I've talked to several people who had previous experience in some kind of production or whatever, and then they found themselves just kind of falling into it. So, was it these personal experiences that led you into an interest in true crime, or was that a pre-existing condition, for lack of a better phrase?
Yeah, I mean, like, I've been consuming true crime since I was a teenager. Back then, people thought you were like a really weird person for liking it, and now it's consumed and loved by mothers, grandmothers. Like, in fact, 80% of our audience is women, according to our YouTube analytics. But back when I was a teenager, this was something that you were only into if you were really weird. And I always was into the psychology behind it. And so that was always like a thing. I kind of got away from it for a little bit. And then when Jurgi and I reconnected many years later, the murders that I mentioned, this kind of made us feel like we had a duty to do this. I just being so close to it and feeling like we could present that case in a fair and concise way.
Yeah, I kind of jumped ahead in my train of thought, because I was going to start asking you guys about motives, because a lot of channels, and I just want to say ahead of time, there's whatever someone's motive for doing a true crime channel, it's well, depending on where you get your material from, fairly or otherwise, that might be a different question. But a lot of the previous guests I've asked, like, what drives you to do this, or what do you think your purpose is? And I get the sense, and of course you can correct me if I'm wrong, I think you might have already answered the question though. There's something more than simply trying to set up a line of revenue or a career out of it. Because Jurgi, maybe about, I can't remember how many episodes it was back now, but it was like maybe 4 or 5 episodes back. You were in the middle of reading your script, and simply relaying the facts caught you emotionally, and you stopped, and you basically just sort of like at the camera said, "I'm not cutting this out," and then you started over again and continued. What causes you to have such an emotional connection to this material, do you think?
I mean, this is not fun to do. This isn't a hobby. These are people's lives. And I feel connected to the victims a lot of the time. The one you're talking about specifically was a situation where a teenage girl gave birth to a baby in a bathroom and threw it in a trash can.
Yes.
And she had a lot of different avenues in which she didn't need to make that choice. The state she's in, she could have ended her pregnancy if she wanted to.
And she could have given the baby up and
at a fire station or something.
Yeah. She didn't even need to do that. She was in a safe space location.
Yeah, where she could have surrendered it without
the nurses were coming to check on her. And I mean, it's very, very hard for me. When it comes to topics like that, I mean, we kind of signal some stuff in the episode. I want to be a mom. I can't be a mom. So sometimes it just kind of hits you hard. And then it's just other topics. Sometimes sometimes things just hit me a little bit more emotionally. And it comes out of nowhere. Sometimes it was a very, I don't want to say it's a problem, because being emotional, being human is not a problem.
No.
But during 2020, we had a lot of episodes where that was a situation where I would crack, for lack of a better term. We have some others that we haven't released yet where that happens recently. It's just a lot, and a lot of this gets to you. I'm our primary writer. I do have some other folks that help me from time to time with researching, but it's very different when you're a true crime viewer or consumer than it is researching all of this. reading different takes of it over and over and over again, putting it in an A to Z storyboard format, and then reading it out loud. It does get to you. And as far as like motives go, that's changed throughout the years. Where we were when we started in 2019 is not where we are now.
Yeah, because there's always the question of, is this simple exploitation at the end of the day, doing true crime, relating this stuff? Is it just for the sake of shock value? What is the sort of the moral center of it? And I think just by definition, true crime reporting or content creation is, I mean, it's inherently exploitative in that sense. But really what matters, I think, like I say, and like you've said, what is the real motivation behind doing so? And for those of you in the audience who aren't as familiar with Jurgi and Truby's work, not all of their videos involve cases regarding children, but a large number of them do involve cases regarding child victims, which is a, let's say, for lack of a better phrase, a subgenre of true crime content that a lot of channels don't report on nearly as much as these guys do. And so I again, from what I've seen and what I've heard from you today, it's not just for shock value. There is something behind it. You're trying to get a message out. What if you had a pie in the sky ultimate hope for what comes about from you reporting on these particular cases? What would you want people to take away from it?
So I think this also requires a little explanation of how we started covering a lot more kid cases than we did initially.
Sure.
Because this was an eye-opening experience for us too. So we operated originally purely off viewer requests. And I guess as things sit now, we still are. Just the backlog goes into 2020. We started getting requests for victims involving children. And at the time I was like, oh, like I hadn't heard of this case before. I can't remember what the first one was. But I hadn't heard this case before. Like, why not cover it? Like, I don't hear much of these. I don't see much of these in true crime. Like, why shouldn't their stories be told too? And so we did it. And then all of a sudden more kept coming in, and then more kept coming in. And as we did more, I just realized how many of them there are. And I was shocked to find out that this is a lot more common than we think it is. And the issues contributing to why these murders happen are a lot different than what I had imagined as to why, or what I was raised to believe. So for example, I was, raised in prime satanic panic. So was Jurgi. I was raised to believe that there were, these panel vans out just waiting to snatch kids from the side of the road, or
stranger danger stuff.
Stranger danger. Yep.
At the supermarket, if I got too far from my mom there, who's been waiting at that supermarket all day, is going to snatch me up and take me away. But in reality, the person who will kill a child is most likely their own parents.
Sure.
And if not their own parents, somebody that they know. And I think not only did we not know that, I think a lot of people don't know that. And I'm finding more and more in covering true crime that there's just a lot of things that people block out and pretend isn't there. One thing that I like to talk about is that for so long, I knew so many people that would talk to me and claim that human trafficking doesn't exist in America. And thankfully, I think we've reached a point where most people know that is not true. I think the last time somebody tried to say that to me, I think it was pre-COVID. But now there is a lot more resources and understanding. In thinking that human trafficking doesn't happen here, it makes it that much more able for it to flourish and take place if people think it's a myth.
Right.
So you see posters now, there's resources now. And from that, human trafficking is still a huge problem, but we're combating it. I think these things have to happen in other areas too. And that includes factors contributing to child murder, which we'll get into. The social services that tend to be involved, because with a lot of these cases, and Jurgi, please at any point you can interrupt me. There is usually somebody in government who knows what's going on and doesn't intervene. Or there are other family members that are trying to intervene or are complacent to intervene, are trying to get the child out of there, and just every like so many people know, and it's so preventable. And
I as far as media teaching me about things, like I remember watching things like Jerry Springer when I was growing up, and even though half those stories are fake and everything, I always thought to myself, well, I feel better about myself because my family's nothing like that. And then I'd watch later on things like Intervention, and you see these, well-meaning people who are enabling the destruction of their own family because their love is actually poisonous, or they're trying to look past it, or they built up such a tolerance to the circumstance that they don't even really see that there's a problem anymore. And that's something that sort of rings in my ears, so to speak, when I watch stories like the ones you guys cover. At the same time, though, a grown adult making choices for themselves about what they're going to intake and so on is one thing. But when it comes to, there's just something like and I think this is instinctual to just civilized people. There's just something inherently disgusting about the most vulnerable amongst us, children and the elderly, but especially children who have absolutely no way to either speak for themselves half the time. The thing that, and I might be rambling here just slightly, but the thing that always strikes me the most when I watch your guys' videos on these subjects is when, classically in most true crime videos, and thankfully these days, I forget exactly what it's called, but like moral true crime, they'll take at least as much time during the course of the video to profile the victim as they do the killer, so they're not glorifying the bad guy all the time. The thing that strikes me the most when I watch your guys' videos on this is how effectively simplistic, and yet how innocent there is of information to profile the victim, because they never had a chance to do anything. You say something like, this child loved playing with bubble guppies and listening to Baby Shark, and I'm just like, that I don't know how else to sort of encapsulate how I feel when I hear that, because my mind is expecting something much more nuanced because I'm thinking of all the other true crime I've watched. And then it just sort of hammers it home. This is a person who never had a chance to go beyond the basics. And yet the basics are the most precious things. And it just hits me right in my chest. And
and all of that information generally pertaining to what they liked or who they were comes from their obituary or a GoFundMe.
Right.
Raising money for their funeral.
Yeah. And it's just difficult because and this is like probably the biggest transition for people who watch like true crime involving adult victims and then watching one involving a child. Now, usually you do not see like a big documentary on a case involving a child. Probably the most famous one that's come out in the past few years is Gabriel Fernandez, but there was so much information there. The average case involving a child victim, there is just not enough information gathered. Not enough people knew the child. And the ones that could talk about who that child was, chances are was the one that took that child's life.
Yeah. Do you think that's part of the reason why a lot of these stories don't get a lot of plays, that there's not a lot for someone to build a narrative around, or really... Maybe, I mean, aside from the fact that, approaching this kind of material for a lot, and I can understand why approaching it can be, or could be, someone could be hesitant to do so because of just the weight of it, and if there's not much to say. But I mean, if the victim, I can't have a better way to say it, the victim practically doesn't exist in the world long enough to represent a victim. Maybe that's part of why these stories don't get covered as much, at least in part?
I think there's multiple different factors. So as far as YouTube is concerned,
Yes.
channels talking about children in any form are very likely to be demonetized. So I think that's why a lot of channels will not touch them.
And downplayed on the algorithm, I assume, as well.
Yep.
Yeah.
If you show faces generally of younger children, that's why we tend to blur. They'll turn your comments totally off.
Yeah, and they'll
And it took us a while to figure out why that was happening.
a lot of conversations with YouTube support, and they're not easy to talk to. And
No, yeah, I know.
Different stuff.
Yeah.
So like, I'm sure I'm preaching to the choir here, but like, it was difficult because like when we did Summer Wells, we put her picture up there and was like, this girl is missing. And just like anytime we did a missing child, we would put the Harmony Montgomery was another one. We would want their face out there and to try to signal boost that. So maybe somebody knows where she is, can find her, something like that. And what would happen is the YouTube AI sees child's face, thinks either kids content or something exploiting the child, and turns the comment off. Or turns the comments off or restricts the viewership. Probably the most egregious thing that happened to us with this is when we covered
Adrian Jones.
Thank you. I almost said Dakota Collins. It was Adrian Jones. And we showed a picture of Adrian Jones, fully clothed, unharmed. And I think we even were blurring face at that time.
At that point we were.
And we received a strike. And when we got the thing in the email, they were given timestamps at that point, and the timestamp was that picture. And so I appealed it, and the appeal was instantly denied. Within 30 seconds, the appeal was denied. So I was told that I had to send a message to Team YouTube on Twitter, and they said they'd get back to me. A week later, they got back to me and they said something to the effect of, this video is endangering this child. And I was like, this child died 5 years ago.
Right.
How am I endangering him? Yeah. So, and again, this hasn't happened with like all of our videos, but, and I think YouTube has kind of turned the page a little on this stuff and feels a little bit differently, because I've talked to some people at support that said, okay, well, you can show children in the thumbnail. Why? Well, why can't I show it in the video? Well, you can show it in the thumbnail. Like they don't really like to explain themselves, but things change. And then they were like, well, they're more concerned about babies being shown and young toddlers. And so I'm getting a lot of conflicting information. And so I say all this to stress that I think this is why a lot of creators don't touch them. A lot of people, rightly so, want to, they might have editors, they might have script writers, they might want to just get something for their time and effort, their labor that they put in. It's kind of strange to assume that people should put in all this effort and get nothing in return for it. But when you cover a case involving children, that is often the reality.
The adpocalypse, the various adpocalypses at YouTube, and especially back in, what was it, 2018, I think it was. I forget exactly what the name of it was, but there was that big hubbub for a while about protecting children on the internet and everything, and YouTube and the FCC and everybody had their day, and they fine-tuned everything, and some things had to be alerted. Is this content available for 18-year-olds? Is it for children? And the algorithm has no gray area because they don't want to risk any kind of legality or anything else. And so you can kind of understand it from their perspective, but then at certain points it's like, look, if somebody's trying to put up something to help a child, to alert the public, that's something that's educational or journalistic, you can't spike everybody all the time. But they still, I've dealt with YouTube before. Sometimes tweeting them out on Team YouTube, like the last time I had to do that, I got an immediate response and turnaround like I was talking to a human. The rest of the time, I think I'm talking to a chatbot. So
like if you have no other option, Team YouTube is usually the best way to go. But it's not guaranteed. I was going to say something else. Oh yes. So you might notice, because some people are like, well, there are news channels on YouTube that show children just fine. Why aren't you showing them? And what's been explained to me, and Susan Wojcicki, when she was still CEO, said something about this, about how YouTube wants to push authoritative content or authoritative news sources. And what that means is ones that she considers reputable, or that YouTube feels is reputable, which tends to be corporate-backed media channels.
Yes.
So I remember that when we got that strike for Adrian Jones, there was a news site that had not only a picture of him up, but had him wounded, like visible wounds on his body, and him practically naked, like probably shouldn't have been shown at all. Like, I think that if any creator had done that, like, people would have been up in arms, but like people give it pass when it's like a corporate news channel for whatever reason.
Well, Jimmy Kimmel can say a joke and have it, broadcast to millions of viewers. Someone who's a small YouTuber with a small channel who doesn't have corporate backing or isn't a whitelisted entity or something, they say the same joke and they get spiked. I mean, it's there's no fairness in YouTube, and I don't know that there ever will be. And boy, oh boy, I got started in YouTube just after, or just as the first adpocalypse was about to hit. And boy, the good old days were actually freedom of expression and some reasonableness was there. But that's something else I wanted to ask, beyond having to now, blur the faces of the children you're trying to get stories out on. What other compromises have you had to make in your production style, let's say, to try to appease the algorithm, and how effective have they been? Like, is the title of the show is Living on Borrowed Crime, so part of it is curiosity about struggles with making your channel at least a I mean, I don't mean to lean onto it like you're trying to profit off of these stories or things, but this is some people's how they pay the bills. What difficulties have you had in trying to turn your work into something that is sustainable for yourselves?
So I think that there is, well, like, the first thing, how have we had to adjust and censor ourselves? I think the big thing that people tend to take issue with, and I take issue with it myself, is you can't say words such as like sexual assault, child abuse, domestic violence, even to the point where if we leave a comment on our own channel with some of those words in there, the comment is scrubbed by YouTube AI. Like, they will delete comments on our own videos sometimes. Like, because most people are asked, hey, what's CA, what's DV, what's SA?
Right.
And then we'll respond, and then YouTube will delete our comment. Not every time, it can be sporadic, but it does happen. So that's something that we have to do. And this is something that a lot of other channels have to do as well.
And their AI, like, it gets really smart about really stupid things like this. Like, when talking about self-harm, sometimes I can't even say self-harm anymore. Sometimes I have to change it to, this person was a danger to themselves, or they attempted to visit the self-checkout line with poison. Like, you have to do stupid things like that. And it's annoying for our listeners. It's annoying to us. It's just so silly. It's silly. We're all
anybody who doesn't know the context of it, they think that you're somehow, a prude or something about everything, and trying to be like all soft-hearted. Well, I mean, not soft-hearted, but you know what I mean.
Like we're just trying. People are like, oh, you're doing these victims a disservice by not calling it for what it is, and it's like,
downplaying it.
This isn't up to me. Like, this is not up to me. And that part is very difficult. And people are like, oh, well, this is just a monetization point. And it's like, it's more than a monetization point, because like, over half of our videos are demonetized anyways. It comes down to, I don't want strikes on my channel, and YouTube can decide for whatever reason, okay, you said these words, this violates community guidelines. And if you, and anyone in the audience who thinks I'm full of it, Here's a couple of examples. Jorgi gave the self-harm one.
Mhm.
We have gotten videos 18 plus. When we did Monica McCarrick, I said that after she took the lives of her children with a samurai sword, she turned that sword on herself. That is how I phrased it. That video was 18 plus, restricted, only shown to a small percentage of my subscribers. And we got an email from YouTube saying, "Hey, we're worried about you. Here is the number for the
right.
S word hotline."
Yes.
And it's silly. And then another one. We did. Okay, here's two more. We did a case that happened during COVID. We were not talking about COVID specifically, but we said that the trial, I don't remember which one it was. Jorgi, if you remember, please interject.
Yeah.
I said that one of the trials got pushed back due to COVID.
Right.
Because I said the word COVID, there was now a little disclaimer at the bottom of the video saying COVID-19 misinformation. Here's the link to like proper sources. And that video was restricted to our audience. So I had to go back in there and remove that and resubmit it. And then everything was hunky dory.
Yeah. I was on some friends of mine, we were doing a nightly news talk show for 4 years. And anytime we said COVID, 2 years after a broadcast, I got a strike on my channel for one of the videos where we talked about January 6th. And now we were suddenly promoting bad actions in the world, I'll just say, for the sake of but thankfully that got cleared up. But yeah, no, the algorithm and everything else, it's not so much YouTube, it's you're allowed tube. Most of the time, and things years after the fact, you'll get spiked for like, what? This thing has been sitting there for 3 years, and all of a sudden now I get in trouble for it, and I got to appeal it, or I have to give over my personal information about something. It drives me nuts. I am glad to a certain extent that for my own situation, I have a full-time job, so YouTube doesn't need to be another full-time job or a main source of income. That I can look at it as a hobby. But just with the experiences I've had on that level, and I multiply that by however many times it goes into channels like you guys or Mr. Black Pasta or Mad Orchard or something, where it's like you're just trying to tell a story in a way that you could find easily on Netflix, or something that in the same vein could have been put out on PBS Frontline. And yet somehow you're this like social criminal or something for just trying to get the message out about something. And just trying to profile someone's story, and he just it's ridiculous.
A social criminal in the eyes of YouTube, and then a social criminal in the eyes of some viewers that don't know any better.
Exactly,
because they think that we're going rogue and doing this stuff for ourselves because we have some like weird agenda. We don't like censoring ourselves in that way, especially like speech. Like there's no need to say like DVSACA. Like I don't see a need to do that. You're
watering down, but not by your own volition. You're watering down the importance and the gravity of what happened, and putting bumpers on it. And it's 100%. You shouldn't be. You either you are, as much as you're trying to honor the victim, you're also trying to vilify the villain appropriately, and not try to like, being forced effectively to give them a pass on the weight of what they've done. And that's the thing that always frustrates me. And the thing is, at least I have an idea from my minor production side and knowing things from other true crime creators that this is what's going on. So I as an audience member, thankfully I give you guys a pass on that. I don't like to take some kind of like moral offense to what you're doing. I understand why you have to do it, but it's also angering as an audience member to see what you guys are forced to have to do just to try to put something out there.
Yeah, and like a lot of people are saying, well, why don't you leave the platform? Well, why don't you leave the platform?
Exactly.
That's the problem, is that YouTube and Google is a monopoly, and so there are so many people coming here, and for what it is the best service there is.
Yep.
You know, like I've tried Rumble, I've tried some of these other platforms. And if you're trying to get a video out there or anything like that, it's going to be difficult. It doesn't have its own algorithm. And like for all my problems with YouTube and its algorithm, the algorithm is a very fascinating and complex and amazing thing that can really curate a person's interests and help them find content that is most likely relative to their interests. And no other platforms have really caught up. And that's why people stay here. So instead, they blame the content creator.
Yeah.
Instead of the person making the rules, which in this case is YouTube.
Have you, some channels have gone the route of having, uncensored versions of their videos on their Patreon or something like that to try to mitigate the effort versus the return. Have you done anything like that or thinking about doing anything like that?
No, because the only thing that would change is probably our language, and it would require like not a complete re-record, but enough of a re-record and then the effort compiling it. I think at that point it would reduce the amount of videos that we output a week in half. And so at this point, I encourage like anyone that wants further clarification to reach out to us directly. Like we can try to, and like people who've watched our videos for a long time, like when we're talking about the self-checkout line, I try to be clear, like YouTube, I say it, I give the caveat, YouTube says we cannot say these things. And if somebody's like, well, what's self-checkout? I'm usually like, this person tried to self-cancel themselves with a knife, with a knife. So like a reasonable person could put that together. The things with like SACADV, there are a lot of channels that already use those. So if you're a true crime consumer, you're probably already familiar with them. So that's like the one thing. I wish I could put something into the description, but I'm afraid.
Exactly. Yeah. You put a key or something, you're just opening it up for more. So you kind of segued into something else I want to ask about. We touched on it a little bit with the schedule and the content. And this is something that I've asked every one of my previous guests because I'm always curious to know. My so far brief experience in creating true crime videos, I had at least mental exhaustion from going through all the material and trying to turn it into a narrative. With the stuff you guys cover, having to marinate in this terribleness so often, I have to assume, as I can tell, you guys are very compassionate individuals. How do you mitigate just the psychological toll, and how does that manifest, if at all? Previous guests have talked about like having to deal with nightmares after sitting in some of these stories for a while. Do you have anything like that in the course of your days? And if so, how do you take care of yourselves in that regard? And just as a precursor to everything else, you don't have to reveal anything more than you feel comfortable with. I'm not trying to get too personal, but it is something that I'm always curious about.
The short answer is yes. And really, I think that if you do this for long enough, you have to find a way to separate when you are working and when you are not. And if you cannot do that over a long period of time, this will fracture you. And with that said, you still look at life differently, and like honestly for the better. I think to like, I didn't want my eyes closed to some of this stuff, to know that these things were going on and I'm just this ignorant person. We always say, if you see something, say something, because a lot of people don't. And that tends to be the lesson from a lot of our cases, is that somebody didn't speak up or didn't speak up enough. And now obviously, like we'll get into later, there are some cases where a lot of people were doing just that. And some arm of the government put the squash on that. But I think that if it is in your interest to make the world a better place, like one has to see the ugliness and the evil, and understand it if you're going to make a change. Now, with that said, like, I don't begrudge anybody who says to me, I can't watch any of the cases you cover that involve children. I 100% understand that. I do not hold that against anybody. It is difficult, it is hard. You know, like, I don't think that people should subject themselves to things that they cannot stomach. But if you can, you should have some sort of awareness of what's going on. I think too many people being in the dark does victims like this a disservice.
Jurgi, what's your go-to, for lack of a better phrase, coping strategy for decompressing from this stuff?
So I really, like, if I'm going to be really honest about this, I don't really have one. Like I said earlier, like, I'm the start of the funnel for a lot of the creation. Either I'm writing it or someone's helping me research or write, and that takes up the vast majority of my time. So I don't really have a good coping mechanism for that, other than at this juncture, I used to be a true crime consumer. Like, Drewby was saying, this goes back to like high school, where, you'd go on GeoCities page to research serial killers, or
you're taking me back now. Angel Fire.
Yeah, I mean, I just turned 40, so I'm old.
Yeah, well, I got 4 years on you. Don't worry.
Yeah, but or you'd go in the weird little section of true crime over at your local Bookland or whatnot.
Yeah.
But like, I'm no longer really a true crime consumer at this point.
Yeah.
I would not be able to do that on a day-to-day basis, because that's what I do to like keep this channel going. So I think if the only outlet I really have is play with my cats. I like to watch travel content. That's my favorite thing. For me personally, to watch on YouTube, I really like travel content. Yeah, that's really what it is.
Yeah, I mean, well, I think something else you miss, Jurgi, is that like the sense of community.
Yeah.
Like, I think taking comfort in friends and people that are close to you, being able to, and I personally, I'm no longer a true crime consumer either, because when you research this stuff, you record it. It's not
an escape anymore.
Especially what we do in our free like the cases that we cover, that we choose to cover, especially lately, in knowing that it kind of colors the rest of true crime in this way that it's just soured it for me. So while I still feel I'm doing my part, like, I just can no longer. I remember when I was in high school, I did my senior capstone project on Peter Curtin, the Dusseldorf vampire.
Yes,
a serial killer in Germany. I did a lot of research on the Cleveland torso killer, which I found fascinating, especially in connection to Elliot Ness's career. Elliot Ness, one of the Untouchables who brought down Al Capone, and then later oversaw. Was the police chief of Cleveland, and then like that one serial killer just tarnished his whole legacy. Like, things like that were fascinating to me. And now I can't even revisit those things anymore. I just can't. And I don't have like a really good explanation as to why that is, but just what we have done, what we cover has colored the rest of it for the worse, in a way that I can't consume it anymore.
Yeah, I think that might be one of the, now that I think about it, might be one of the reasons why I haven't yet pursued doing any more true crime videos, is because I love too much to be a consumer. I see it as kind of a weird escape, and I don't want to lose that or something. Maybe I saw something in that last video that I made that made me kind of go, I'd rather be someone on the outside looking in than otherwise for some reason. But that's a whole other.
I respect that 100%. I mean, like I told you off camera, like when you did Alonso Perez, like I thought that was really well done. And
thank you.
I, especially for like one of your first 3 videos, was it?
Yes, it was the third. It was the last of my trilogy thus far. Yes.
That was leagues better than the third episode we ever did. Leagues
thank
better
you.
than the 12th, like 20th. So while I completely respect like your want to like keep that separation, and if that is something that truly resonates in you, I think you should like adhere to that. But I think it's a shame, because I think you actually have more of a knack for this than you think you do.
Oh, gosh, you're making me blush. Well, I appreciate that. So we're all entwined in I have a very small cheat sheet of the topics I wanted to cover, and we're all sort of touching upon everything. So let's move on to, as we're about 45 minutes into things. Wow, time flies. So you mentioned earlier and intimated about government involvement in cases such as these. So let's start off with, and for those of you in the audience, I to this point I've never sort of pre-broadcast to my guests questions I would ask. It was all very conversational and everything. But in this instance, in my communications with Druby and Jurgi ahead of time, it was the one time where I was like, I can't flat-foot them with this because it's probably going to be kind of an involved set of questions. So I had two areas I wanted to talk to them about, and that's regarding both, we'll just say for the sake of brevity, CPS in general, and then and then afterwards, resulting laws. So let's start off with the CPS question. My question to them was, as it is now, in your research, specifically regarding cases regarding children, what have been the most common either, and I suppose it could be overlapping here, the most common inadequacies in the system you've seen and or excuses given when CPS fails children in these instances? What do you see as the biggest weaknesses and or escape hatches in your research?
Do you want me to take that one, Druby?
Yeah.
Okay,
I think
so
that's a good one for you.
I think the best way to kind of explain this is to give a working example.
Yes.
And I chose this one because a lot of people who might even be casual true crime listeners, because they watch Netflix, would know about it. And that would be Gabriel Fernandez. So he died on May 24th, 2013 in Palmdale, California, after his mother and her boyfriend abused him in the most horrific ways possible for an extended period of time. We had teachers, we had security guards, we had all sorts of mandated reporters reporting what was happening, and the social workers took no notice.
Mm-hmm.
And in 2020, the trials of Gabriel Fernandez went out. Everyone was so shocked, and how could this happen? But what they didn't mention in the documentary, and it's really upsetting, is it wasn't the last time this happens. So they had all the information that we had social workers falsifying public records. We had social workers not taking action when it was clear that this little boy was like being tortured to death. And so it was just horrible. In 2018, we have Anthony Avalos, who had almost the exact same case happen, and he dies.
In the same county.
It's all the same county. So he's in Lancaster, which is 14 minutes north of Palmdale. And a year later, we have little Noah Quattro in Palmdale with the same situation. So like a lot of the patterns that we see generally are social workers with too many cases. They are underpaid, or some that just don't care, and they're just not doing their jobs. And it could be coming from on high, or just some of the individual ones. I mean, I don't want to overspeak here and say that some of them don't care, because I know some social workers personally who do care, but are so overwhelmed that they couldn't possibly do their job properly.
Given too much of a caseload.
So between like 2013, after they already know this is a problem and they're going to fix it, we have two other boys in the same area. They're dying by the same circumstances, and they didn't even talk about that. And not only that, they were failed by the LA County DCFS, but these people, the folks that killed their children are also involved with like this very niche program called Hathaway Sycamore's Child and Family Services. And it's all connected. It's like the same story 3 times in a row. In at least 2 of these cases, other family members wanted to take care of the children, and, they were thriving in care. And then DCFS throws them back with their abusers.
Right.
It's just insane. I don't know if
this is the abridged version.
This is the abridged version of it.
I like, and if for anyone who's seen like the Gabriel Fernandez documentary, they kind of made it sound like, and I've seen like people on Reddit being like, oh yeah, I'm a part of like, I'm a caseworker for this, and Gabriel's brought up all the time, and we're actively making things better. And it's like, well, what happened with Anthony Avalos and Noah Quattro? And by the time that documentary came out, like, Noah Quattro and Anthony Avalos had already been murdered, and they were not mentioned. Like that, the end of that documentary makes it sound like, okay, this boy died horrifically, but we learned from it and we're doing better. No, that is not the case based on what we have found. And Jurgi, you found more things to like kind of back that up.
I mean, it's in the case of Gabriel, all that happened was 2 of the social workers the social workers and 2 of their supervisors got fired, but all other like charges against them, because they got charged with child abuse and falsifying public records. They all got dismissed for like no probable cause. Case of Anthony Avalos, no DCF workers have been charged in connection with his case at all, and all allegations that were against anyone involved were all dismissed as unsubstantiated. The deputy district attorney, his name's John Hatami. He is the only person that like literally cares about these kids at all. He's very like out there. He helped protest. He tried to oust George Gascon, who is like the DA there. He actually took the death penalty off the table completely for people who are killing people.
George Gascon did. George Gascon. To be clear, that was not Hatami. It was George Gascon.
Right.
So in Noah's case, sorry, like I get really upset about this. The great grandmother who initially had temporary custody, she sued the LA County DCFS and Hathaway Sycamores. That lawsuit to this day has not been resolved.
So
like,
it's a combination. Yeah. So it's a combination of overworked caseworkers, underfunded. I have to imagine, just being sort of pragmatic, I have to imagine part of the reason that they don't penalize caseworkers like, anybody on the outside would want to is probably because if they did, they'd probably ward off more people from wanting to take the job if they think that their entire life is going to go kablooey because they made a mistake or they missed one thing or they get accused of negligence or something else. I'm not sure that there's a solution to that, because just like with being we've seen the last several years, if you're a police officer just doing your job and not doing anything crazy, and then somebody takes a video and puts it out of context, suddenly now you're the worst person in the world. I can't even imagine what it must be. I mean, if true crime content creators get numbed or otherwise having to wade through stuff just on the periphery, I can't even imagine what a well-meaning caseworker has to go through in this stuff, or what the effects could be. Yeah, exactly. And so I mean, I don't expect there to be a panacea to this question or anything else. But I mean, if you had a magic wand and something realistic could happen, from what you observe, what would be one thing you'd want to do to try to fix some of these core problems?
Well, for example, so
I know there's a broad question. I hope I don't completely throw a wrench into things, but
no. So in terms of like things that have already been done to change things, well, nothing's been done. So like they talk this great deal about, oh, we're doing things in light of Gabriel, but that's not true. Like things over in California have already gotten worse. And that's above and beyond nobody being held accountable. In California specifically, where these cases took place, the 2023-2024 governor's budget proposal for child welfare actually reflects a net decrease of $420 million. So to start,
geez.
I would not do that.
Yeah. Okay.
In 2022, they passed a law that prohibits calls to CPS for poverty-related reasons alone, which in
What
itself
does
is
that mean?
problematic. So like if you're not feeding your child because you can't afford it, I really do believe that CPS should be called to get you services. It's not always a situation where they're going to come and take your child away, but it could be a door to get you the services to get back on track as a good parent.
Yeah,
Poverty related. That could be, yeah, like that could apply to anything. That's insane.
so my understanding, their justification as to why they felt that shouldn't be a thing anymore is because it's demonizing people in poverty.
Oh,
okay, like
geez.
okay, you don't want to demonize people in poverty, but like, do you want children to be the epitaph of that? Like, for example,
Yeah.
with, I believe, Noah Quattro, one thing that was kind of some red tape between prosecuting those responsible for abusing Noah Quattro, because there was a lot of evidence of that. The parents made some claim that CPS was being racist towards them. Parents were Latino.
Mhm.
And so because of that, the state of California was like, well, we don't want to be viewed as racist, so we have to
Of
back
course
off.
not. Yeah.
So that actually reflects of something that's going on right now.
Mhm.
So in 2023, LA County also began pushing mandating reporting systems for reform. County leaders cited that child welfare systems over surveillance and harm of marginalized communities is like a problem.
Of course.
Like, I just want to like note here that Gabriel Fernandez, Anthony Avalos, and Noah Quattro all came from Latino backgrounds. We should be reporting. It doesn't matter if someone is a person of color, if they're white, it doesn't matter. Just report when you see something.
Yeah.
This is like a direct like insult to like the whole memory of them. So really, like, it's only gotten worse. It's literally only gotten worse there. So if I had a magic wand, I would just make all of that not happen.
Yeah, let's
at least
undo
get it
that
back to the
stuff first.
baseline.
Yeah,
Like,
let's
get it back
not-
to the baseline.
Yeah, let's not try to save ourselves from being called bad words by trying to service
Yeah.
the people that need the help the most, because of a lot of the stuff that I cover on my channel deals with the ridiculousness of first putting everything through and valuing people on the basis of their race or ethnicity, and then deciding whether or not they're worth the time or something based on the merits of their situation. That's just infuriating, especially when you're here to talk about affecting innocent, defenseless children.
Right.
Okay, so also you kind of touched on this a little bit, but next thing I wanted to ask was, in the resulting aftermath of some of these cases, oftentimes, classically, you'll hear a new law has been proposed and or passed, something like, I mean, the most famous example, I think, is probably the Amber Alert after Amber
Yep.
Hagerman, who was abducted and murdered in Texas. And so, but I feel as though the Amber Alert is sort of a exception to the rule. I hope those sirens in the background don't bother anybody. I got firefighter sirens in the background. I apologize, guys. I
No,
can't do anything
that's
about that.
fine.
You can barely hear it.
Yeah, like I heard it for a little bit, but yeah,
Okay, yeah,
go ahead,
I can't tell how much my microphone picks up. So
No, totally
Amber
fine.
Alerts, maybe the most famous example, might be the exception to the rule on effectiveness. Have you seen evidence in the case, in either in the aftermath of cases you've covered or otherwise, where a new piece of legislation, statute, law, or whatever that came about as a result of a case ended up actually mitigating a problem down the line? Or are these, the cynical part of me often thinks this is just mostly PR fluff, but I'm always fingers crossed hoping that if a flaw was found and a law was passed, then a hole has been patched up. Do you see that happening with any hopeful frequency?
So
No.
first I have to give the caveat. Well, I would say maybe Code Adam, Yergi.
Yes, but like, here's the thing about it. So I don't want to jump too far ahead. So we got Code Adam, we have Amber Alerts, and they're both
Mhm.
named after Adam Walsh, Amber
Yes.
Hagerman, both children who died.
Mhm.
I don't know if you want to touch on like Code Adam, Drewby, but Amber Alerts, they're not that effective sometimes. And a real world example of this is we had one last night here in Maine.
Okay.
There was an Amber Alert, that was put out at almost 10 p.m. here in Maine for a mother and a daughter who were abducted at 11:30 in the morning. They took that long to let us know about it. Meanwhile, the police already knew that the person that abducted them had gone into New York because of like toll related reasons, had crossed over at almost 4 p.m.
But the Amber Alert was only issued in Maine.
And only in Maine.
So
great. Yeah.
We had to take that Amber Alert and make a community post saying, hey, friends in New York, New Jersey, Massachusetts, surrounding areas. Okay, I guess we I don't know if you heard that, but
yeah, I did. Yeah, that's fine.
Some sort of motorcycle person.
I don't feel so bad now.
Yeah, exactly. There, just that was. I texted a friend to come by and rev his Harley.
Revenge is mine. So say the motorcycle. Okay.
Yeah. So they when did they drop it? Like 10 p.m. or 9 p.m.
It was like 9:55.
Yeah, and so we put it up on a community post immediately, and then while I was sleeping, they retracted the Amber Alert at like 2 or 3 in the morning. And this is just a thing that tends to happen with Amber Alerts here, and the child will be found by the time they get through the red tape, and they can actually issue an Amber Alert. The child might have already been found, alive or dead, what have you.
Yeah.
So that's the thing people don't really see behind the scenes. People complain, oh, I got some like annoying message on my phone. They don't realize the amount of time that's passed and all the efforts that's gone into that to get the clearance for that Amber Alert.
Sure.
Now, the other side of this, we've had listeners in Toronto who have told me that their version of the Amber Alert is a lot more lax. So their phones are going off constantly. Like any time a child goes missing, it is constantly going off. Your phone is like constantly barking at you. Now, I can't confirm that myself, but this is what I've had multiple people tell me. I don't know how much of that is exaggerated, but that is the flip side when you allow these to get through all the time. So I feel like when it comes to the Amber Alert, that is a hard needle to thread effectively.
Yeah, because it's run state by state, if I'm not mistaken. It's not a federal system that's all like got one set of standards or communication lines or anything. So
right. And the thing that bugs me a lot of that is sometimes they will not issue them for older teenagers because they consider them an adult at that point, and they can leave whenever they want to, even though in some cases they're not even a legal adult yet.
Right. Yeah, because what qualifies as an adult, again, goes state to state. Some people can consent at 16 in one state, and the next state over, it has to be 18 for whatever it is about. Yeah, I dealt with that with the Ralph Shorty case, where 16 was the age of consent, but was also the age for sex trafficking if you happen to make use of a prostitute of that age. And so it's this weird kind of crossover thing. I can only imagine, like, you would think, and I know I assume my brain wants to predicate every statement I say about this kind of stuff. You would think that in this day and age, in the current year, that law enforcement agencies, especially within border states one to another, would have some kind of setup communication line for things like this when there's an emergency that could cross over into different jurisdictions. And yet time and time again, it feels like we're still stuck in the 1980s with analog lines and no computers or something. It's very frustrating. I can't even imagine what, and at the same time, I can't imagine that the people involved in this love it either, having to jump through the hoops or anything else. I assume, unless I'm given evidence otherwise, that most people working in social services, most people working in law enforcement want to see people protected and hate having to go through the red tape and would love to see these things work the way they're intended. But there's so many stepping stones put in place to either, like you mentioned, to protect people's feelings or to protect the PR of the state. And like, oh, we're not being this or we're not being that. We don't want to be called an ist or a phobe or whatever else. When there's a human being involved and you're worried about your appearance, that stuff just drives me up the wall.
Absolutely. Right. And to be, this was kind of hinted at earlier. Oftentimes when it's an election cycle
Yeah.
and somebody talks about, oh, we're going to do this to protect kids. Kids are just a talking point. Like, we were interviewed by somebody, I think it was last year, and that interview never saw the light of the day. But one thing that they asked us was just like, this is a Republican thing, isn't it? And I was just like, it would be so simple if you could just say one party was the enemy of child welfare. And
Yeah.
I'm sorry to say that is not true. It is
No.
both
everyone.
sides of the aisle. This is just a feel good talking point, and nothing really is done. Now,
Yeah.
to your point, like most people, I think, want to protect children. Most people, especially those working in these services, or or first responders or anything like that, absolutely they don't want children being murdered. But with all of these things now mixed in, it's going to get in the way. And if you're a politician who's trying to run for re-election, you will say whatever you can. And then afterwards, like, do you really want to like go into CPS and clean house? Do you want to insert any other complicated thing that comes that somebody more versed in political science than I could explain? Like these are complicated and difficult things. But the at the end of the day, like, something can be done, and people do have the power to change it.
A lot of it has to do with staffing too, because in Maine, with different cases, every time a child dies, there's new legislation. They'll go into these focus groups and point fingers at one another and try to see who dropped the ball. And they'll do things like, in Maine, they updated their, I guess you could call them, like, child abuse hotline call centers to make sure that if somebody calls in a complaint, there's a system in place where it's not a whole bunch of just random cases. You'll be able to put everything in just one big case. And I don't know why this wasn't always a thing, but apparently it wasn't always a thing. And that's all good and well. But when you don't have the people to actually enforce all of this new legislation, and you still have caseworkers with dozens of cases on, the plate, it doesn't really help. And like I said, like, I know people who work for CPS. Several years ago, I was on a roller derby team with a bunch of women that formed it. They actually were part of CPS, and they made the team because they wanted a healthy way to blow off steam.
Right.
And every one of those women ended up having to quit because they didn't have the time to attend, because they were getting pulled out to, pull a child out of some sort of terrible home, or go into court, or, whatever, or they had a second job because they just weren't paid enough on top of all the work they were doing, and they were exhausted.
Yeah.
So they can make all these new rules. If you don't have the people to either like do it, or people with the passion to do it, nothing's going to get better. And I hate to be a cynic like that, but that's just what we're seeing.
Well, yeah, and I can't help but also my brain goes into contingency mode when political side of things. It's like, well, if I'm the administrator of a state government or something else, and I put out a call for CPS workers, well, that tells everybody we have a child abuse problem in my state, and I don't want that out there. This is an election year, et cetera, and so forth. Yes. And as far as like particular parties or anything, I don't know. Has there been a state in the union yet that you haven't done a story from, regardless of the political structure of that state they're in? Because I've seen you guys have done across the board practically.
Some states are more common than others. So I can't, Jurgi, we've not done an Idaho or Montana case?
No, we haven't. We have done a Montana. We did. It was Leanna Gardape.
And maybe North Dakota. We did South Dakota.
Well, yeah, but point being is that these cases happen everywhere.
It's literally everywhere. At one point, we were going to go state by state and do everything, but it was just so overwhelming. It was just never ending.
Sure.
Yeah. And that's the other thing too, is that we aren't running out of material. Like, and that's a problem.
And that's the terrible part about it.
That's a big problem. Like, we started doing 2 a week, and still a mountain of cases that we can do. And like, the thing with most child murders is there is just like a small article, maybe 2 paragraphs, and there's just not enough to do an episode on.
Sure.
So knowing that most child cases have that little information on them, and we're still not running out of cases, like it shows you how much of a problem it is. To your question of, is there a state in the union we haven't done? I think maybe the better question is, what states keep coming up? And
Sure.
I would say,
that's also true.
I would say Missouri, Ohio, Florida,
Texas.
I think that
California,
though. Indiana. We keep doing Evansville, Indiana somehow.
Evansville keeps coming up, and I don't know why this one town keeps coming up on the radar.
Well, let's move to maybe something a little less weighty to phase towards question time here, because we're getting close to it. I know this is drawing back quite a bit, but I'd be curious to know about, if you're willing to talk about your process in just making a video. Like, do you have like when I did my true crime things, first thing I did was, do I have any supportive media to use as supplement to the narrative? So like for Alonzo Perez, there was the escape footage, which I'd seen several years previous, but I had no context as to the case surrounding it until I decided to research it. And then I was shocked to find out this wasn't just a funny video of a guy escaping police custody. There was a whole lot of stuff going on there. And then it was finding every article I can on it, any other supplementary information, making a timeline, creating a narrative, a script, recording stock footage, and so on. Do you guys have it down to a science, you think, yet after all this time? And what's your general order of operations in making a new video?
I think that, like, and this is probably why, like, at first making true crime content takes so long. You get to a point where you're able to suss out pretty quickly if there's enough information to do an episode. So quite often in sources, a lot of information is redundant. And once you're able to kind of sift through the noise and see, okay, what's unique information and what isn't, that can tell you, okay, I can do a 10-minute episode on this. I can do a 30-minute episode on this, or what have you. Ones that were shorter, but had like some substance, that wasn't just like, this child was found murdered. It was one of the parents. They were taken into custody. That's all we have. If it was something a little bit more than that, we used to do compilation episodes where we would have like 4 or 5 cases on one episode. And I don't regret doing that, because, like, again, everyone's story deserves to be told, but it feels more genuine being able to take one episode and focus it entirely on that person, and not just be like, and now on to this one. You know what I mean? Like, there's something about that. And again,
and now the weather.
Right. And people who do that, I'm not like throwing any shade at, because again, like, how else are you going to tell these stories and still make like a video? Like, if you make too short of a video and your videos tend to be of a certain length, YouTube raises an eyebrow at that. They'll be like, hey, this video is shorter than normal. Like, so your watch time is lower. What are you doing? You know, like, it's just stuff like that. Like, you don't really want to deal with as a creator, but still kind of have to. So like, people who do like compilation episodes like that, I take no issues with, but for me, it feels a lot more organic, and it's a lot easier to streamline a case when you can just make one episode about that person, which is not to say that we'll always do it like that, but that's really like the first step, is sussing out, okay, do we have enough information? Right. And then making a timeline is a helpful piece of that process. And then just trying to write a script from start to finish, and verifying that the sources are accurate, and being able to, like, if I have one piece of information, I want to have 2 other sources that corroborate that information. And if I don't have that, that is something I can't confidently report on. So I try to follow the ethics of journalism. I don't consider us journalists, but I try to follow journalist ethics.
Do you source primarily news outlets, or do you also seek out court filings for the direct quotes and things like that? Or
whatever information we can get. So obviously, like, news sources are are helpful. If you can get an affidavit or something like that, or some sort of like a document from the court, like that obviously is helpful. That's not always available though.
Mhm.
So
Right.
sometimes you kind of have to go with what you have on that. And sometimes not having anything released from the courts, like there's trials that have taken place or haven't yet taken place. And when you, okay, so I'm getting ahead of myself. Sometimes there's trials that have taken place and they don't release the affidavit, and that can make things very difficult. And then what I was about to say, you can have cases that have not yet gone to trial, so there is no affidavit, and those can be problematic.
Mhm. Like sometimes we get lucky and folks want to talk to us about the cases. I think the most interesting case that we haven't covered it yet, but we're going to be in the future. It's a lot of information, and I want to take my time with it because it's going to be a very long episode. We were invited to a sentencing. We were invited to a sentencing. Family, their daughter was killed in front of them by her boyfriends. They are from our town, and they invited us to his sentencing, and that was something. Yep.
Okay. So, what have you had the occasion to contact directly courts and or law enforcement agencies for information, and how do those conversations go? Like what's in my work, I've had to contact public servants before, and I've found that the best currency you can have when contacting a public servant is empathy, because they're under no obligation to be nice to you. They're getting their paycheck either way. So
Yeah.
everything you can do is just sort of like take as deferential a position as you can to try to get what you need and not bug them too much and not become a bother. Yeah.
Yes. So and even just like reaching out to people who might have been connected to the case.
Right.
Sometimes we'll be fortunate enough that a member of the family reaches out. And normally, like with a child case, if the parent is the perpetrator, you're being reached out to by a more distant relative that wants you to honor their relative's story. So sometimes like that will arrive in our email or in our inbox, and that makes things easier. As far as a public servant is concerned, yes, they are overworked, and it doesn't help them any. They don't get anything out of fielding this to you. Like
Exactly.
It's something that they have to like. So you being deferential, being empathetic, and expressing that you're just not somebody who is just looking for kicks, that you run something like, and most
want to
places,
help, basically.
most like we have law enforcement just cold message us thanking us for some of our work, and that
nice.
was a surprise. Like that's happened like multiple times.
Yeah, because like it's cold cases, and they don't want the case that they've put all this work in, and they're invested in this person who hasn't made it home. They're happy that you're keeping it alive.
Something to further it. Yeah, exactly. And if that's something that I wish I could do more, is like cold cases, because I feel like that's what law enforcement needs the most help with, because that is what they seem to have the least resources for. At least that's what's been shared to me. So yeah, having empathy, being deferential, and explaining to them what you do, being transparent about what you do. And for us, it's a little bit more helpful because they can go to a YouTube channel, they can see the number of videos we have, the amount of views we get, and the subscribers we have. And I don't take that for granted. However, in this case, it is useful into getting some of that information, so that way we can better signal boost.
Yeah, your body of work legitimizes your intentions.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Compared to if you're first starting out, or you don't have enough videos under your belt, like that might make it harder for somebody to want to work with you. And there's some people that just will not work with you whatsoever, or they think that true crime is interfering with investigations, or even after the case has been closed. Like some people just have this viewpoint, and that's just is what it is. But I think more people in law enforcement and these sorts of positions are looking at true crime more positively and understanding the value that it can bring in cases both opened and closed.
All right. Well, let's see. We're getting to question time from the audience. So everybody in the chat, if you have a question for Jurgi and Drewby, put it up there now-ish. It would help out. I already see a couple here. So let's start off with Miranda Stone, queen of the Discord servers, mine and others. How can you be reached? Miranda asks.
So you can probably the easiest way is you can leave a comment on our video. You could send us an email if you have if you want to reach out to us for any reason. I'll put our email here in the MachinePodcast@gmail.com. We have a Discord. We are on most forms of social media. We don't really like to be active on certain forums, but we still check our messages. Like, so for example, we aren't really active on Twitter or things like that. But we will check our DMs on Twitter. It's mostly just ways so that way being omnipresent enough that you can get a hold of us on your chosen social media platform.
Yeah. And I can testify that, I mean, I emailed Drewby and Jurgi several months ago about the possibility of an interview, and circumstances at the time did not align. And I figured I'd never hear from them again. And then one day it's like, hey, you still ready for that? Like, yeah. Truth be told, I make a small confession. Between the season and certain one of the hard things about arranging interviews like this is people's work schedules with their production, real life, and so on, and time zones as well. Up to this point, I had honestly, and I want to thank you guys for this, I'd honestly started to give up on the idea of trying to make this a continuing project of mine, but you threw a new spark into it. So I'm into the new year. I'm getting ready to try to get some new interviews going if I can arrange them. So thank you for
I
that.
am very happy to hear that, because like even though you've only done 3 true crime videos, like I do not overlook what you have done for the true crime community. You are constantly reposting other creators' videos on Twitter. You're signal boosting other people's cases. You're trying to like help bring what I consider us to be a very fractured community together. And I don't take that lightly. That is very needed. And I don't know really how best to do that. And you are figuring out a way to do that. And I very, very much appreciate that, because I think our community needs a lot of love. And I think that if we came together a lot more, like we could be a lot more effective in the ways in which we signal boost cases, the way we tell stories, and the way that we can hopefully bring about change to some of these systemic issues that are causing these problems.
Yeah, one thing I've said for years to the audience, of course, is that if there's a content creator out there whose stuff you like, regardless of who it is, if you like their stuff, share their stuff, Twitter, Facebook, and elsewise, because as compared to YouTube, you guys are our best algorithm. And that really does, because if you have friends, mutual friends that like the genre of whatever it is that's being produced by a creator you like, that's how they gain new viewers. That's how it gets spread. So thank you guys for reposting my stuff, the Misery Machine stuff, anything else that you guys like. And yeah, when I came up with this idea for this series, I really liked having on, I just by happenstance, just by, like I say, practicing what I preach, boosting creators whose stuff I like. My first real true crime friend, if you want to call him that, was Matt Orchard, when his channel had like 2,000 subscribers or something. And I interviewed him. I was the first guy that had ever interviewed him or even asked. And then that led me to other people and reaching out. And I just realized that most channels, you guys are an exception. Most channels are just one-man shops, guys sitting in their apartments with their video editing stuff, putting stuff together, dealing with this stuff alone, both psychologically and professionally and everything else. And I just thought I know what it is to be a lonely guy. I know what it is to feel disconnected from people. And so I just, not to feel like I'm somebody's psychologist or something, but I just thought there's such a rich wealth of experience, one creator to the next, on method and process and storytelling, that could probably benefit if there was some more crossover and stuff. And I understand that, lots of true crime creators talk to each other. There's a whole community going on elsewise, but I just feel like it's neat to hear different people with a different perspective on the genre have an opportunity to talk about it and relay their ideas or their thoughts. And especially if I can get people from different stages in their careers onto a show to discuss things, and what tricks they've learned or what methods they've come across in creating their stuff is just, I just like it. This is just as a viewer. I figure if I like it, maybe somebody else will like it too. But I really appreciate the compliment there.
No, I think that's helpful. Like when we were, and a lot of creators have this type of issue. You're kind of on an island for a while, especially if you have no connections to YouTube prior or any creators. You are left to figure it out for yourself, and it's a lot of these things are not obvious. They're difficult. And there were so many times earlier in our YouTube channel's lifespan that I wish I could ask somebody, for help. And I'd really like to foster a community more that makes that more conducive and less lonely, because it does get very lonely and frustrating.
Mary Ellen says, I just want to say that I really appreciate the kindness and change that Misery Machine bring to true crime.
Thank you, Mary Ellen.
Let's see. And there was something else up here. Daisy Anazims, if I'm saying that correctly. At least these stories that are told and shared keep things fresh, constantly fresh. By the stuff being put out each week, it keeps eyes open, can't turn heads away forever.
That is true. That's very, very true. I couldn't say that any better.
All right. Let's see. Let's make sure. Oh, well, here. Wild-Eyed Wander. At first, I was turned off from the Misery Machine just from the titles. However, this conversation has changed my mind. Oh,
okay, so nice. Yeah, let's I appreciate that.
I was going to ask about that because if there's one thing, it's not just your channel, but other channels too. I've seen complaints about. I saw it. I forget. I'm not going to. Even if I could remember, I wouldn't say who said it. Somebody said weekly world news titles in true crime.
It's very tabloid-esque.
It is. I can see I don't know how you get people's attention without doing something like that, but I could see how some people might be turned off by it. What do you guys have to say about your
Okay, so I wish this was something that we talked about earlier. Because I think
thank you for bringing it up. Yeah.
And the reason why I just say that is because I think a lot of people operate on these assumptions of why do true crime creators do this? And what's even worse is like some people will say, and it's usually just like a couple people on Reddit, like most people, like, let me be clear. Most people who interact with us are very, very overwhelmingly positive. And like we have an incredible like community of viewers and people who understand what's going on and can read in between the lines or understand like this hellscape YouTube is set up. But there are people that will say, oh, this one channel is the only ones doing this, and they're doing this for some insert exploitative reason, or they're doing it for a cash grab. Well, a lot of true crime channels are demonetized, especially channels covering cases involving kids. Those are very likely to be demonetized. So it doesn't really have anything to do with that. If you look at most channels, most true crime channels, they have to do some sort of eye-catching headline. And that is unfortunately what it is. There are some creators that don't, and they already were bigger first. But the vast majority do it. Like if you look at some of the biggest of the big, like Mr. Ballin still does it. And some could argue that he doesn't need to, but like if you look at like the top of the true crime list, like they have to do it. And this is what YouTube has fostered for an environment that if something is not immediately clickable, your video will be buried and buried fast. And if you have a problem with this, my advice to you, and this is not me being flippant, I think that this is what more people should do if they feel this is a problem, is to boycott YouTube. Like, I don't think that you can use YouTube and get away from this. So we try to exercise a level of, there's a word here that my post-surgery brain is not finding.
Restraint?
not even restraint.
Discretion.
I'm glad you said restraint though, because there's something else I need to say in regards to that too. So earmark that one. We make sure that what is said actually happened in the case. And there was an argument that if you're going to understand what happened to this poor victim, you need to be faced with the reality of what happened. I could put the case of such and such, and not only will nobody click because that's the environment YouTube has fostered, but you don't really understand just how important this story is. And I wish that it was easier to do under 50 characters, or whatever the restriction limit is. But this is unfortunately what YouTube has, the position creators have been put in. And when I talk to more creators, I'm not really talking to people who don't care about victims at all, and they're just doing this for some sort of cash grab. They're working with the set of circumstances that are given to them. And for the people who say, okay, well, you should just go against the grain anyways, there are creators that do that, and you don't know who those creators are because they don't show up on your feed because you're not playing YouTube's game. And so again, boycott YouTube. I'm saying this as somebody who has a channel on YouTube that's like relatively big. I don't like it. I don't like it. Neither of us like it.
No.
It would be much easier if I just put the case of such and such every single time. It would be easy. I wouldn't have to exercise any brain power, and I wouldn't have to marinate in the awful details of what just took place to be like, how would I explain this to somebody? In a way to express just what terrible thing happened to this person and why this is such a problem.
Clickbait is an unfortunate reality of life now. It just is. You can't really like.
It has been forever, just in different mediums.
Yeah, a channel with 2 million subscribers or something, any video they put out, it's going to get attention shared, and otherwise they don't have to do too much heavy lifting. But like you say, when you're trying to gather an audience, get somebody's attention, alert them to the seriousness of it, I can't think of another way to do it. At the same time, though, someone coming at it without that perspective, just seeing it blank, they could say, this is just exploitation. And so I can understand why people have that perspective, but I appreciate the fact that you guys, and I'm sorry I didn't come up earlier. I didn't know why. I thought I had it on my list of things to ask about. I'm glad you guys gave that explanation. Let's see. Kim Coldren says, Drewby and Yurgi are the best creators I've found for the type of cases they do. They care, truly care, and their passion is evident in every video.
Thank you, Kim.
Thank you, Kim.
Wild-Eyed Wanderer follows up and says, I understand it is more that children is a tender place for me, so that when the titles are so blatant, it is hard to trust the video will be respectful. And I agree. I only watch my subscriptions.
Yeah, and I think this is like another thing too. And I understand where it comes from organically, where you're just like, okay, well, this has to do with a child, so this should be off limits. But let's unpack that a little bit further. There are a small subset of people that believe that child true crime should either not exist or it should not exist in the way that other true crime does. And when you start and think about, okay, well, if we were to make that a reality, what would happen? Would it be as easily consumable as other true crime? Would this be something that somebody has to, question and ask themselves, does this exist, and then dig for it? Because like I am a true crime creator, and over a year in, I did not realize the amount of cases involving children that there were. I thought they were significantly more rare than they actually are. And I didn't understand the nuance that goes into it. I didn't understand who the perpetrators likely were. I didn't understand how the government plays a role in this. And I found out about all of that because somebody else opened my eyes to it, because people messaged me and said, you need to cover this. This case needs a voice. And so if you are not a creator and you are like me and many other people that are not aware of these cases taking place, you unfortunately have to have your eyes open one way or the other. And
Yeah.
I don't see a reason as to why the titles should be any different between that and an adult case. I agree.
Sure.
Children, it feels extra.
It sucks.
It hurts more. It really
Yeah.
does hurt more. It really does, because these are people who never got a chance at life.
Right.
You know, like that old movie, was it Along the Waterfront, where he's yelling, "I could have been a contender. I could have
Yes.
been a contender. Like, could have been, like, I could have had a life. I could have been something. I could have done something." That is what happens when you murder a child.
Yeah.
And that, I think when you put the kid gloves on and handling this stuff, you are making this problem worse in that way. I feel like we have a duty as content creators to properly portray this for what this is. And
Yeah.
I mean, you know this firsthand, like you did, well, not with a kid case, but like when you did Alonso Perez, you know, you put free to kill on there, you know, because to try to signal to somebody exactly what this case is about,
Right.
something that the case of Alonso Perez wouldn't have actually captivated. And that is the problem with just putting the case of such and such. And when you do the case of such and such, the only way somebody would be like, "Hey, I know that case," is because somebody else in some other form of media clickbaited you into watching that over there.
Right.
So it's just one form of media or the other, unfortunately. And then to Jurgi, you had something to say before I get into restraint.
I don't know, like there's a thing about it. Like, obviously this type of content isn't for everybody. And just because it isn't for you doesn't mean that it shouldn't be said. It doesn't mean that these stories shouldn't be told. And just because it isn't for you doesn't mean it should be silenced.
Mm-hmm.
100%.
Yeah. Well, it's obvious you guys, despite what YouTube is trying to do, or reflexively or otherwise, to hamstring you, your channel growth over the last year alone has been, incredible. So people are getting the message, even if YouTube's trying otherwise to suppress it. And so congratulations on that front, at least, is that what you have to say and the stories you have to tell are getting to more people over time.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that. Do we have enough time for me to touch on restraint?
Oh yeah, sure. Go ahead.
Yeah. Okay. So the other thing, and I think this needs to be made clear, and I would have brought this up earlier had I thought about it, because I always couple this with the titles. Restraint on the information you present. There is this other false narrative that a very small group of people have, is that true crime is trying to take the worst possible details and put them out there. There is a lot of information that we do not report on, and is usually stuff related to the autopsy report. Okay. If there was a sexual assault, that is heavily censored. There are boundaries we won't cross, because I think that you can say how a victim was brutally killed, and that might wake you up to this. I don't feel as if it is necessary to say in how exactly somebody was violated in that way. And I think that you can talk about this happening without going into detail, but still get your point across. Now, I understand the slippery slope there. Well, can't you apply that to violence? And then at point you're not talking about anything at all. Yes, absolutely. But I think that this idea that a lot of true crimers are just going to take any salacious detail, any picture, anything that they get, and put it out there because it makes for good media, I think you would be surprised the number of people that hold back in what they choose to release when they do these. And I challenge people to, if you have the stomach for it, and if you think that somebody is going too far with the information that they're given, look at the autopsy reports and read some of the court documents, and what is said in there is probably way worse than what's in the YouTube video. And there's a reason for that.
For example, Lily Peters, who we just did, I had to heavily censor that
Sure.
For a multitude of reasons. Daisy, if she's still in here, knows that because she is very familiar with the case because it's near and dear to her. There were just some things you couldn't say.
Yeah. Yeah, my previous guest, Mr. Black Pasta, I called.
Oh, I love him.
Yeah, Mr. Black's great.
Yeah, Mr. Black's great. Yeah, he's awesome. And I called his style, if you want to call it that. I think I categorize it as vengeful. There's like 3 different styles of true crime reporting on YouTube that I've seen. You've got journalistic, you've got casual, and then you have almost vengeful in a way. And he held back details, but he was as bald-faced about what was going on as you could get. But even when he didn't give the details, both him and with you, I keep flashing back to your Yergi when you're talking about the case of the girl in the hospital and everything. Even if all the details are not given, the enormity of what the reporter, let's say, knows going on in the background is expressed through the way that you're restraining yourself. And I think a sensitive audience gets that, and they don't. The details are not necessary to get across the idea that something horrible happened. And if you really want to know, the internet is a thing. Outside of that, but I appreciate when people don't try to candy coat this stuff. Sometimes you can get a true crime thing. I mean, and true crime doesn't have to involve murder. You can have a true crime case that has sort of a gallows humor to it or something.
Absolutely.
When we talk about somebody,
place for that. There's a place for that.
Sure.
Like, I don't think that like these people that are like, oh, comedic true crime doesn't exist. Like just because most people don't do that, does it, like a lot of people cope with humor, and nobody should be made to feel wrong for that being their coping mechanism.
That's how we started very early. Like I said, Misery Machine is today that has a purpose was very different than Misery Machine before, where like it was like a lot of dark humorous stuff. We did some serious stuff too.
We were making fun of killers. And the funny thing is that when we started getting kids cases, we're just like, I even said like, hey, we're doing things different this time because it just, it didn't feel right. And like, obviously if somebody's like being really ridiculous, we might make a joke about it. But like at this point,
it's more snark than it is anything. Like,
yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I mean, the title of your channel alone, the first time I saw it, I thought that was a little bit of a nudge and a wink of like, yeah, we're self-aware of exactly the kind of stuff we're dealing with. It's like, that almost gave me sort of like an assurance that I'm not dealing with absolute take yourself too seriously drama bombs or anything. But at the same time, when it comes to the material you cover, none of that even factors into it. I know that you guys take it seriously.
Like in one way, this has all affected me. 2019, 2020, when we first started this, I was a very funny person. I like prided myself of being a very sometimes dark, but funny person. And I don't know how to be that way anymore.
Yeah, especially when you put a mic in front of us. Like if you heard like old stuff, like especially when we did like Patreon episodes, and like our Patreon episodes weren't ever involving true crime. They were just riffing on current events, talking about our days, and just open mic, let it go. And like our improv chemistry was very, very good. And I just felt like more light on my feet in that way. And now covering this, I've obviously gotten better as a presenter in other ways, but I have lost that portion of myself. And I mean, being interviewed like kind of like helps wake that up, so to speak, like, and just, the light on your feet part anyway. But I feel like something has, we have had our eyes open to something, and it's just hard to operate in the same way. And I don't regret it. I don't regret it, but like, if you, I don't know. That's something I'm still trying to figure out how to reclaim. I think you're too.
One more thing here from Wild Eyed Wander. Thank you for shedding light on your channel. Although I'm still not sure I'll be able to listen to these stories, I am so glad to know that they're being shared, as said better by those before me.
That's very kind words. And again, if this is not if these aren't cases you can stomach, that is 100% understandable. Like no one should force themselves. But if you're, let's say you're somebody that like, you know, I really love kids, I'm passionate about child welfare, but I can't hear these things. I don't think you have to listen to the stories. I think that there's other research that you can do that still protects you from most of it, or can help better equip you to be a better child advocate in the wild. Because chances are, if this is going to happen around you, it's going to be through people you know. And I think raising your awareness and getting better skills in that area allows you to still honor child victims without being a consumer of true crime content involving child victims.
Well, I just want to say, as a viewer, I'm very glad that you guys, essentially fall on your sword for the rest of us when it comes to reporting on this stuff, because not only do you bring these kind of cases to light, but as well, I think maybe on the periphery, you're encouraging and giving some sense of safety to other true crime content creators that it might be risky, but you can cover this stuff and there is a place for it. And there are people who will listen, and there is some kind of good that can come out as a result of that. So I want to thank you guys so much for the heavy amount of work that you do, both in the content you choose and the quality with which you produce it. As we wrap up, is there anything, any upcoming events or anything you'd like to promote, any projects or anything else you did, anything you think I didn't ask about or cover that we should touch on real quick?
We've taken a small break from our production schedule, but we'll be back to it.
I can't imagine why.
Yeah,
you know, I mean, now that you're less of a man than you were a second.
I know exactly. So, yeah. I am somebody. I was always raised to, honor my commitments, and my gallbladder, who was working for me, got in the way of that. So he's since been fired.
Yes.
He's currently rotting away in some biohazard bag in a hospital. But
oh my gosh,
he rest assured he will not be a problem ever again. If we choose, if you ever choose to have us on again, he will not be a problem.
Oh man, a fate worse than New Jersey. Yeah.
Yeah. It's going to be business as usual for us. 2 episodes a week, and not next week because it'll be the first. We don't release on holidays. But usually Monday and Thursday are our release days. If we live stream, which we do on occasion, that might be Friday or Saturday, but you can expect an episode every Monday and Thursday.
Okay. Jurgi, what's the best treat you found for cats?
For cats? My cats really like those churu sticks.
I see those all over the place. There's this channel called Girl with the Dogs who does these grooming videos, and she's always trying to coax the cat out of the bag with those churro things, or churro, or whatever they call them. All right, I just want to ask about that. I was raised by cats, so I always have an affinity.
Not
for
only
cats.
that, but we have a friend. She has an Etsy page called Proxima Designs, and we're gonna actually be doing some ads for her.
Okay.
But she makes these really, really cute homemade cat toys that have catnip in them, and I swear by them. That's the only cat toys they get now.
To the point where our kitties are trying to get into a cabinet where a sealed bag is in with a sealed cat toy that has catnip inside of it, and they're bashing at the cabinet to try to get into it. No,
we need these for the ad. They have to be clean. You'll get your hairs all over them.
So if you were raised by cats, I have to know how many cats you have.
Oh, well, I currently don't have any. The apartment I'm in doesn't. But just a brief story. Those of you who have been on my channel will have heard this before. I was brought home from the hospital by my parents. And at the time, they owned 2 kitty cats, a Siamese and a black cat, who were both from the same litter, strangely enough. And my parents bring me into the house for the first time. They put me down on the couch. The cats notice that there's something new in the house. There's a new smell. What is this thing? And according to my parents, and this is the story, they both got up from sleeping, pad over to the couch. They put their little paws up on the couch and peek their heads over and start sniffing at me. And then they both jump up, circle around me, and then lay down next to me, yin yang style. And there's a photo of me being surrounded by my brother cats. And so, yes, I am a cat person. My exclamation on my channel oftentimes is "Holy cats," because unbeknownst to everybody, I'm actually I worship the Egyptian gods, and cats are a messenger from the underworld. So that's my That's my cat story. Miranda Stone,
That's
thank you for
wonderful.
putting up the link to Proxima Designs.
Yes, thank
cat
you,
toys.
Miranda. I appreciate that.
And so, any other quick shout outs to other creators that people on here might not have heard about before that you think need more attention?
Yes. I saw Justin Interrogations in here earlier.
Yep.
Big
Hey,
shout out to Justin. Thank you for being on here. Big shout out to True Red Crime, Explore With Us, Morbid Curiosity, Damon Burial.
And also Mr. Black's new channel.
Yes, Mr. Black.
Mhm.
Yes.
Yeah, Cringe Against Humanity. Yeah, there's a story behind all that. I've been in touch with him
Yes.
about it. But yeah, I'd also like to shout out Dreading for you guys who like long form true crime content. Dreading's really good. You already talked about Explorers With Us. What was that other? Little Shop of Crime. That's a channel that I don't think gets enough attention. Little Shop of Crime is
I've
great.
never heard of them.
Steve,
We'll have to check them out.
yeah, Steve. I tell you what, you want to talk about. If I had to think of the most soothing voice to listen to the worst of people's behavior,
Really?
shout out to Steve. Yeah, shout out to Steve at Little Shop of Crime.
I'm excited because if you were to ask who is like one of the best true crime voices, my first thought is Dave's Lemonade.
Yeah. Well, Dave has quite a following. Every time I have him on, someone wants him to just say particular words in his tone just for their own vibrations, I'll say, but otherwise. So guys, thank you so much for making the time to talk to me. I really appreciate it for many reasons, not only the fact that I'm a fan of your work, but that again, you're popping in out of nowhere and reigniting my interest in continuing this series will keep it going as well. I hope I can have you back on again in the future. I've been wanting to do this for a while, but life stuff kept getting in the way, either with the guests or myself. I want to sometime have a panel discussion of different true crime content creators who have all covered the same case to discuss the details thereof, trying to find that crossover and trying to deal with time zones, or when suddenly somebody gets hit by a car, and that's a Dave's Lemonade story. It always kind of throws a wrench into things, but someday soon, I hope to have that happen. Again, everybody, if you're curious at all about Misery Machine or need some information to share with your friends about them, all their links to their particulars are in the description below. As well, if you haven't already, please take a look at the donation page for the Trinity Jubilee Center of Lewiston, Maine. That is the charitable organization that Misery Machine supports. Appreciate you guys taking a look at that. If you can donate, thank you. If you can't, that's fine. Please share that out on social media if you're able. With that, everyone, thank you for joining us for this. Let me know down in the comments what you thought about this if you're watching this in the future or want to say something that I missed during the course of the stream. Please leave a like on the way out. I appreciate it. And with that, Drewby, Jurgi, thank you again so much.
Thank you for having us. I really, really appreciate getting on here, talking this stuff, because a lot of the stuff kind of goes unsaid and there's a lot of assumptions that are made. And I'm glad that like we can, as creators, can clear the air on a lot of stuff like that.
And to everybody out there, best of luck in the coming new year. And if you like this kind of interview format, I've got 7 previous episodes on the playlist on my channel, so take a look at those. And everyone, moderators, thank you for keeping an eye on things, even though everyone here is so well behaved, you have very little to do. Everybody who donated either to myself or to the Trinity Jubilee Center, thank you guys so much for your generosity. Enjoy the rest of your Friday. Enjoy your new year upcoming. For those of you that have a 3-day weekend, congratulations. For those of you that don't, I am with you in spirit on Monday when you have to go to the work. And I hope you're all safe and well. If you're not well, please get well soon. And we'll see you on the next one. Take care. Bye-bye.